Namaste, blessed be. I'm Akasha and welcome back to Akashic Song. If you are new to this channel, welcome. I talk a lot about witchcraft and goddess-based religion, spiritual practices, awakening, Hinduism and yoga. So welcome. And if you are coming back, hi again. So today I wanted to share with you my H for the ABCs of Witchcraft, which is the 2018 YouTube Pagan Challenge. So H in my practice represents the hearth. And if you've never heard of the hearth, spelled Hearth, the hearth stands for the place where you do your cooking. So back in the ancient days, they did their cooking where we now call a fireplace. That's why it's called a fireplace, because they oftentimes built a fire there and had their big cauldron there that they would be cooking things in or what have you, and then maybe the top of it or around it they might have sacred objects that would represent more of an altar. That's a hearth. So I'll tell you a little story about why the hearth is really sacred in my practice. So back in 2014, let me say, I've been practicing magic for 20 years, since I was 20 years old. Actually, going on 21 years now. I've been practicing magic since I was 20 years old. And I have no formal training. So everything that I've learned through reading and experimenting. My practice is very experiential, very ecstatic, very led by intuition and through the guides that come in and work with me. I work with fairy guides, and I work mainly with the goddess traditions or goddess-based paths. So I've been practicing for many years on my own, and I considered myself to be a witch. But I didn't know a lot about Wicca. And for some reason, Wicca really hit my radar back in 2014, probably because that's when I started really watching a lot of YouTube videos. And there were a lot of people talking about Wicca. And I had heard it before, but I didn't know a lot about it. I had kind of brushed past it in books, but it wasn't something that I had really sat down and read a lot about. And so as I started reading more about it and finding more about it, I was really interested in the nature-based path, connection with the elements, observing the turning of the wheel of the year, which we call the Sabbats, the 8 holy days that pagans celebrate, are very big deal in Wicca. And so the more I read about Wicca, or the more I heard about it, it just seemed like a really lovely, beautiful, earthy practice. And anyone who knows me, I've been associated, or I've been called a lot a hippie. I've been associated with the hippies. I've been called a hippie my whole life. And so it just seemed like, this kind of seems like something that might be really up my alley. And as a person who's very devotional in my spiritual practice, it felt like it might give me something to ground my practice in terms of having a religious backdrop or a mythos backdrop to my practice, and then still doing the things that I do as practice, but having there be some light dogma, right? There's no church of Wicca, but there is, we follow the reed. There's a belief in the Lord and the Lady, or the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. You can read all about Wicca. So in 2014, I had decided, after I had come into contact with it quite a bit, that it was something that I wanted to formally study and see whether or not it was a path for me. So I read a couple of books that really started me to feeling like that might be my journey. So I have a couple of them in front of them. One of them I don't have in front of me. So the one of the books that I read is Wicca, The Complete Craft by DJ Conway, and you can see I tagged it all up. This book takes generally all of the principles of Wicca and just really fleshes it out so that you can kind of get a shadowscape, right? And then I read this other book called Book of Shadows by Phyllis Curott. This book is amazing. I love this book. This book was fantastic, and I'm reading it a second time, which is why it was in my hands, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to talk about this today. In this book, Phyllis Curott goes through her transformation from a very young professional into a witch in a coven, and goes through a full initiation over the course of the book. But she's also telling her life, so it's a story. That's a true story. So it's a biography, it's her life and things that are happening over the course of this 1 year and a day, at the end of which she gets initiated. So it's very interesting, and it factors into the story for a reason. So the third book that I read that was really instrumental in me deciding that I wanted to walk the Wiccan path was, I believe it's called Wicca Year and a Day by Christopher Pinczak. And you can look all of these up. Christopher Pinczak, I can try to spell his name. Penczak. I think that's correct. Pinczak. Wicca Year and a Day. So as I was reading these other two books, I was doing the modules from the Wicca Year and a Day book. And it just kind of goes through really short lessons. They're usually like 1 to 2 pages. A topic is explained, and then you have some homework that you do that's generally pretty short. It requires you having some supplies. Like it might tell you at the beginning of a section, you're gonna need myrrh powder, you're gonna need some rosemary, you're gonna need a red candle and a white candle, right? So it kind of sets you up, and then you go and get your supplies, and then you go through those couple of chapters, and there'll be moments when the homework coincides with the supplies that you got. So it was really cool to follow along and do that work. If you want something more interactive and you're curious about Wicca, I would say a really good module to follow along with here on YouTube. There's a channel called The Coven of the Open Mind, and the High Priestess, what is her name? Tehila Firewind. I watched hers as well recently, just to kind of, refreshers, things like that, just kind of watch it. And it was actually really cool to do it following along with a teacher who's she has really cool slides and lots of information, jam-packed information, and homework assignments, a lot of reading. And she takes you through doing your dedication, and at the end, if you want to do your initiation, what have you, as a solitary witch or Wiccan. So I was approaching the end of my year and a day doing the Christopher Pinczak book, and I felt like this is something that I want to do. But I did not know how to complete an initiation. Solitaries don't necessarily have to do an initiation. Initiations really represent a person's stepping out of ordinary consciousness, closing one chapter of their life, and setting their feet firmly on a path of a new chapter in their life. So some initiations would be, I forget at what age, it might be like 12, or coming of age for young men. In the Red Road tradition, a young man, Native American, would go out and have, they would have their vision quest and find out the path for their life. That's a type of an initiation. You're going to go through trials. You're going to experience some feeling of fear or not knowing, but you're going to come through that experience feeling like, I am now this new person. I have been initiated into this path. So I wanted to have that experience, even though as a solitary I didn't really need to, right? I had been practicing magic for 20 years, but I wanted to be able to say, I am Wiccan. Now, anyone can say that, right? Anyone who has studied this path and is practicing the way of Wicca, doing, following the Sabbats, I don't know. If you are practicing the tenets of Wicca, you can fully call yourself Wiccan. However, Wicca itself came out of a tradition, or was popularized as an initiatory tradition wherein only a witch can initiate another witch. So that's not to say you can't practice, but when you go into certain lineages like Gardnerian witchcraft, Alexandrian witchcraft, there's many traditions. That's not this video. They expect you to initiate into a coven in order to be a recognized Wiccan priest or priestess. So I knew that I wanted to practice solitary, and so I didn't really need to do that. But for my own peace of mind, I wanted to say that I had gone through a self-initiation, symbolizing what my trajectory was, what my path was, what my plan to dedicate to this road, and how it can take me into the next phase of my awakening and embracing my psychic abilities and growing as a person, as a human, as a witch, as a woman. And so I had worked with a couple of goddesses, and I felt like I should probably just, I will say, at initiations, sometimes people dedicate to a particular god or goddess as a part of their initiation. In this book, Phyllis Curot talks about doing that. Curot talks about doing that. And the witches who initiate into the coven choose the names of the goddess that they are working with. They're goddess based. So I wanted to do something similar because I really liked that journey, and that felt good to me. So I was getting an acupuncture session. I was having an acupuncture session. I went to a place where I get acupuncture, and they have you recline and they play really soft music, and you oftentimes just take a nap and drift. And I used that time to do a meditation, and I just went into like a really deep trance. And I asked out on the astral. I went to Elfheim, as I tend to do whenever I have some deep questions, and I asked, is there a goddess that would step forth and initiate me and claim me as their priestess, and we could work together as I go forward? Now, I fully thought that Isis might come forward, that Bast might come forward. At this point, I had also worked with, no, I hadn't worked with Hecate at this point, but I thought that there were some other goddesses who I had worked really closely with that would come forward, and I'd go, great, this totally makes sense. We've worked together. Let us continue our journey. But a goddess came through that was completely unexpected. I heard in my mind's eye, or my mind's ear, I'm clairaudient, Vesta. And I said, wow. And I'm sitting by the lake that I always go to when I'm in Elfheim, and I'm just looking into the lake, and very clearly it rose again, Vesta. So I just said, okay. And I stepped out of my meditation, and I went back to, getting my acupuncture. I had my needles removed, went back to my life. And I could not get it out of my mind. For the rest of that evening, all I heard was Vesta, Vesta. And I said, who is this Vesta? Now, I'm sure on some plane I already knew who Vesta was, right? Because there's the collective consciousness where if we tap into what other people are already thinking, it's being put out onto into the collective consciousness, and you can receive it. That's how a lot of psychic information is gathered, right? It's not that we're just divining this stuff. It's already there, and we're picking up on it. So, but in my conscious reality, I could not remember who Vesta was. Now, I learned a lot about Greco-Roman mythology when I was in high school. So I thought, this sounds like some kind of Greco-Roman goddess, but I don't really know who that is. All I can associate Vesta with is an 80s soul singer. And that's not who's calling me. So I went to work. I got into the books. I started looking through all of the mythology books that I have and reading stuff on Google, and I found her. Vesta is actually, I have her picture over my altar. I never show this, but I'm going to do this today. So if you can see that picture, that is a representation, there we go, of Vesta. And she is the goddess of fire. She's the goddess of the hearth and home. And that flame that she's holding in her hand represents the sacred flame. And she had priestesses that worked at her temples called Vestal Virgins, and they were charged with keeping this flame alive. Now she has a counterpart, or I shouldn't say counterpart. The Roman goddess was derived from the Greek goddess named Hestia. So when I heard that, I also asked, oh, is Hestia calling me? And very clearly, Vesta. And I was like, I don't have any connection with this Italian white goddess of fire. Now I know the gods are not any race, but I'm just saying what happened in my mind in that moment. I was like, I can't make sense of this for myself. I have no connection to this, but okay. So I let myself continue to do the research, consider to do the work, and I got closer and closer to who she was and her sovereignty and she represents. I don't have time to go fully into it, but she represents female sovereignty and power. She refused to be married, and two of the Roman gods wanted to marry her, and she asked, I believe it was Jupiter, I might be getting that wrong, but she asked if she could stay chaste, that she didn't want to be married to anyone. And so there was a temple that was in the center of the Roman government, and it was considered huge high worship. Girls were chosen at 6 years old to be Vestal Virgins to tend the sacred flame, and they had to tend this flame as priestesses for 30 years before they could be married, and they could not let the flame go out, and bad things happened if they let the flames go out. I won't go into that because that's not this video. But so as I was doing all this research, and I started to feel this thump going in my heart and in my body with Vesta and this Hearth goddess and this powerful woman of the home who refuses to be subjugated by a man, refuses to be forced into working for anybody. I work for myself, bitches. And I was so allured by this. I wanted to be married. This is before I was married. I wanted to be in a relationship. And so that did frighten me a little bit, but I decided I'm going to trust that if this is who the universe answered me as, then this is the universe answering. And that takes a huge leap of faith. I'm going to tell you that. When you're walking these kinds of paths, it takes a huge leap of faith to say, if I asked the universe an answer and the universe answered in this way, or I asked the universe a question and it answered in this way, then I have to come into some level of trust. But it took, I'm going to tell you, it took at least a week before I said, okay, I'm ready to do my initiation, because I wanted to make sure that this was real for me. So I did my initiation with Vesta, and this is my first time sharing her name on my video. I've kept that really quiet to myself. But I did my initiation with Vesta, and she's kind of been an overarching guide. Even though other guides come through, she is my matron. And so her worship or her practice happens a lot at the hearth. So an interesting thing happened a year, not even a full year, after doing my initiation with Vesta. I met my husband. This sounds really strange, right? But I met my husband. We got married. I moved into his home. And for the first time in my life, as a witch, I had a hearth to practice at. And so I made the hearth the center of our Sabbath practice. And the altar was set permanent. And I changed it every Sabbath. And we had a huge wheel of the year there. My husband is very supportive of my path. And so the hearth began to factor in really strongly into my practice. And I kept my cauldron in the fireplace area, and the top was all of the altar items. I featured it in other videos and in photographs as well. So now that I've moved to this new house, I don't have a fireplace here. So I've had to transition my hearth to my altar and kind of trying to create that same energy, that same atmosphere here. And so I realized how important the hearth actually was in my practice when that was the central place of worship for me, for any Sabbath ritual. And it was the central place that I held for Vesta. And so now not having that, she's over this altar, and I have items on this altar that are for her. But it is something that I absolutely didn't even realize that I was going to miss until it was gone. I was like, wow, I miss having a hearth. It was not a working fireplace at all. It literally was just a place of worship. And so I just share that with you. Take from it what you will, but the hearth factors in really prominently in my practice. The hearth also is a representative or a representation of kitchen witchery and kitchen magic, and being a witch that's very focused on practical magic and magic that comes from the home. And the home, since getting married, has become something that's actually really important to me, and how we dress our house and how we keep the energy here and keep the hearth and the sacred flame lit. So blessed be, and I hope you all had a beautiful new moon, and I will be back really soon to share more with you. Namaste. As I am, as you are.